Before you scroll any further, stay with this message, because something important is unfolding behind the scenes, and your heart may have been sensing it long before your mind could explain it. This isn't about coincidence, and it isn't about chasing false hope. It's about an emotional shift that has been quietly taking place inside your soulmate. A shift they never expected to experience, but can no longer ignore. For a very long time, they believed the safest place to remain was in the familiar, even if that familiar place was filled with old pain, unfinished memories, and chapters that should have ended long ago. They convinced themselves that carrying the weight of the past was easier than risking another disappointment. Yet lately, something has begun changing deep within them, not through dramatic events or sudden revelations, but through quiet moments when silence became impossible to escape. During those moments, they started asking themselves questions they had avoided for far too long. Why was their heart still searching for something more? Why did the future seem impossible to embrace while they continued looking backward? Those questions have slowly begun rewriting everything they once believed. And listen carefully, because this is where the story begins to change. Your soulmate has started realizing that the past no longer feels like home. What once felt familiar now feels heavy. What once felt comforting now feels limiting. They have spent countless nights replaying conversations, revisiting memories, and trying to convince themselves that unfinished chapters deserved one more chance. But instead of finding peace, they found exhaustion. They discovered that no amount of overthinking could change what had already happened. No amount of waiting could rewrite yesterday. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It appeared little by little, growing stronger every day until it became impossible to silence. Sometimes the greatest awakening doesn't come from gaining something new. Sometimes it comes from finally admitting that what you've been holding on to can no longer carry you forward. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that truth, and it is changing the way they see everything. The most surprising part is that they never planned to let go. They believed they still had unfinished business with the past, believing one more answer or one more explanation would finally bring the closure they had been searching for. But life has a remarkable way of revealing that closure rarely arrives from looking behind us. It comes from finding the courage to face what lies ahead. Recently, your soulmate has started noticing that every attempt to revisit old emotions only leaves them feeling emptier than before. Instead of healing, those old stories keep reopening wounds that were never meant to define their future. For the first time, they are beginning to see that holding on is no longer protecting them. It is preventing them from becoming the person they were always meant to be. As this realization grows stronger, another feeling has quietly entered their heart. It isn't fear. It isn't regret. It's possibility. A quiet but undeniable sense that life still has something beautiful waiting beyond everything they thought they could never leave behind. That feeling has surprised them because they spent so long believing their future would always be shaped by their past. Now they are beginning to wonder if the opposite is true. What if every difficult lesson was preparing them for a connection they couldn't yet see? What if every ending was gently guiding them toward a new beginning they had almost missed? Those thoughts have become impossible to ignore, and with each passing day, they feel themselves taking one small step away from yesterday and one quiet step toward the future. But what they have only just begun to realize is who that future may be leading them toward. And that changes everything. For a long time, your soulmate believed that holding on to the past was the only way to protect their heart. They convinced themselves that if they stayed connected to what once was, they could avoid making another painful mistake. Every disappointment became a lesson they carried. Every broken promise became another reason to build stronger emotional walls. At first, those walls felt necessary. They created a sense of safety, a place where they could hide from uncertainty and convince themselves that avoiding new risks was wiser than opening their heart again. But over time, those same walls became a prison they had unknowingly built around themselves. Instead of protecting their peace, they began protecting their fears. Instead of moving forward, they found themselves standing still, watching life continue while they remained emotionally tied to memories that no longer had the power to change. Deep inside, they knew something wasn't right, yet they kept telling themselves they simply needed more time. They believed another month, another season, or another year would somehow make everything easier to understand. Yet the answers they were waiting for never truly arrived, and this is where everything slowly began to shift. Recently, your soulmate started noticing that the emotions they had been carrying no longer felt familiar in the same way. The memories that once demanded all of their attention suddenly felt different. They weren't disappearing, but they were losing their hold. Instead of feeling trapped by yesterday, they began asking themselves why they had allowed yesterday to define so much of today. That question stayed with them far longer than they expected. It followed them during quiet evenings, during busy afternoons, and even during moments when they thought their mind was occupied with something else. No matter how much they tried to focus elsewhere, the same realization continued returning. They had been giving so much energy to a chapter that had already reached its ending that they had forgotten another chapter was patiently waiting to begin. That thought felt both comforting and unsettling, because accepting it meant admitting that the life they had become comfortable with was no longer the life their heart truly wanted. The more they reflected, the more clearly they began seeing the patterns they had repeated for years. Every time life offered them a chance to move forward, fear quietly reminded them of what had gone wrong before. Every opportunity was compared to old experiences. Every new feeling was measured against old disappointments. Without realizing it, they had been allowing the past to make decisions for their future. They weren't choosing happiness. They were choosing familiarity, even when familiarity continued, bringing them the same loneliness they had hoped to escape. That realization wasn't easy to accept because it required them to acknowledge that many of the limitations they believed came from the outside world had actually been created by their own fears. It wasn't that life refused to give them another chance. It was that they hadn't fully believed they deserved one. Now, for the first time in a very long time, that belief is beginning to change. Your soulmate has also started recognizing something else that surprised them even more. They realized that healing doesn't always happen by forgetting the past. Sometimes healing happens by understanding it. Instead of asking why certain things happen to them, they have started asking what those experiences were trying to teach them. That single change in perspective has transformed the way they view every disappointment they once carried. The pain no longer feels meaningless. The delays no longer feel like punishment. The endings no longer feel like proof that happiness wasn't meant for them. Little by little, they are beginning to understand that every difficult chapter shaped them into someone stronger, wiser, and more emotionally aware than they were before. They may not have appreciated those lessons while living through them, but looking back now, they can finally see that every experience was preparing them for a future they couldn't yet imagine. As these realizations continue growing stronger, your soulmate has begun noticing another quiet change inside themselves. They are no longer spending every moment asking what they lost. Instead, they have started wondering what they might still gain. That difference may seem small, but emotionally it changes everything. Their attention is slowly shifting away from regret and toward possibility. Instead of replaying conversations that can never be rewritten, they find themselves imagining conversations that haven't happened yet. Instead of wishing they could return to an old version of life, they are beginning to feel curious about the life that still lies ahead. Hope, something they thought had faded long ago, has quietly returned without asking permission. It didn't arrive all at once. It appeared gently, almost unnoticed, until one day they realized they were thinking about tomorrow with more excitement than yesterday with sadness. There is another truth your soulmate has recently discovered, and it has become impossible for them to ignore. They have realized that the greatest obstacle standing between them and the future was never another person, another circumstance, or another situation. It was the fear of trusting their own heart again. They had become so focused on avoiding pain that they unknowingly avoided happiness as well. They mistook emotional distance for emotional strength. They believed keeping their heart guarded meant keeping it safe. But now they understand that a heart locked away from pain is also locked away from love, connection, growth, and everything meaningful life has to offer. That awareness has become one of the most important turning points of their entire journey, because it has shown them that true courage isn't pretending nothing hurts. True courage is allowing yourself to hope again even after life has tested you. Now they stand at a place they never imagined they would reach. The weight of the past is beginning to feel lighter with every passing day, not because those memories have disappeared, but because they no longer define who they are becoming. They are slowly releasing the belief that yesterday deserves control over tomorrow. Every reflection, every lesson, and every quiet moment of honesty has brought them closer to understanding what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. They are beginning to believe that the future deserves the same attention they once gave the past. And as that belief continues growing stronger, they are unknowingly taking steps toward a connection that feels different from anything they have experienced before. But before they can fully embrace what is waiting ahead, one final truth is preparing to reveal itself, and once they see it clearly, there will be no turning back. Something remarkable has been unfolding within your soulmate, and they are only now beginning to recognize how deeply they have changed. For so long, they believed the answers they were searching for existed somewhere behind them. They thought if they revisited enough memories, replayed enough conversations, or understood every unanswered question, they would finally find peace. But instead of finding clarity in the past, they found themselves returning to the same emotional crossroads over and over again. Recently, however, something inside them shifted in a way they never expected. They stopped searching for reasons to hold on and started searching for reasons to move forward. That single change in perspective has quietly transformed everything. It wasn't triggered by one dramatic event or one life-changing conversation. It happened through countless quiet moments when their heart finally grew tired of carrying burdens that no longer belonged to their future. There comes a time when the soul realizes that healing isn't about reliving old chapters until they make sense. Healing is about accepting that some chapters fulfilled their purpose simply by teaching us who we are. Your soulmate has begun reaching that understanding, and it has opened a door they never believed they would have the courage to walk through. As they continue reflecting, another powerful realization has settled into their heart. They have started seeing their past with compassion instead of resentment. For years they judged themselves for the choices they made, the opportunities they missed, and the moments they wished they could change. They carried guilt for things they couldn't control and blamed themselves for outcomes that were never entirely theirs to decide. But now they are beginning to understand that they were simply doing the best they could with the knowledge and emotional strength they had at the time. That realization has brought an unexpected sense of peace. Instead of fighting against their own history, they are beginning to embrace it as part of their journey. Every disappointment taught resilience. Every setback taught wisdom. Every goodbye taught them the value of genuine connection. They are no longer asking why difficult experiences happen to them. Instead, they are asking how those experiences shaped them into someone capable of loving more deeply, understanding more fully, and appreciating what truly matters. That change in perspective has become one of the greatest gifts they have ever given themselves, because it has replaced regret with gratitude and replaced bitterness with quiet acceptance. And as acceptance grows, something else has quietly taken its place. Hope has returned to their heart, not as an overwhelming emotion, but as a gentle certainty that life still holds possibilities they have not yet experienced. They no longer wake up believing that their best moments belong in the past. Instead, they are beginning to imagine that their most meaningful chapter may still be waiting ahead. That thought would have frightened them months ago, because believing in the future meant risking disappointment again. But now, the possibility of remaining emotionally stuck feels far more painful than the possibility of trying once more. They are beginning to understand that every meaningful journey requires leaving something behind. No one walks into a new season while carrying every burden from the last one. Eventually, something must be released so that something better can be received. Your soulmate feels themselves standing at exactly that point, where letting go no longer feels like losing. It feels like making room for something that has been patiently waiting to enter their life. One of the most surprising changes has been the way they think about you. At first, your presence appeared in their mind only occasionally, almost like a passing thought they quickly dismissed. But as they continued releasing old emotional attachments, your memory began returning more often, and each time it carried a different feeling. It wasn't based on longing alone. It wasn't built upon fantasy or wishful thinking. It felt peaceful, familiar, and strangely reassuring. They began noticing that whenever they imagined a future free from the weight of the past, somehow you were always part of that picture. That realization caught them completely off guard, because they never intended for their heart to move in this direction. They believed they were simply trying to heal themselves. Yet healing has a remarkable way of revealing truths that fear once kept hidden. The more they became honest with themselves, the more impossible it became to ignore the connection they feel whenever thoughts of you arise. It no longer feels like coincidence. It feels like clarity. As the days continue passing, they have also started paying attention to something they overlooked for far too long. They realized that peace has a very different feeling from familiarity. For years, they confused the two. They believed staying connected to old pain meant staying connected to what was important. But now they understand that peace does not come from repeating the same emotional cycles. Peace comes from finally accepting that life cannot move forward while the heart refuses to let go. This understanding has brought an unexpected sense of freedom. They no longer feel responsible for fixing every broken chapter or answering every lingering question. Some stories do not need another ending because they were already complete. The only thing unfinished was their willingness to accept it. Now that acceptance has arrived, they are experiencing a kind of emotional freedom they haven't felt in years. Every day they wake up feeling slightly lighter than the day before, and with each passing moment, The future becomes a little brighter than the past they once refused to leave behind. Your soulmate has also discovered that true transformation rarely announces itself with grand gestures. More often, it happens through quiet decisions made when no one else is watching. It happens the moment someone chooses peace instead of resentment. It happens when forgiveness becomes more valuable than holding on to pain. It happens when hope becomes stronger than fear. These are the invisible victories that change a person's entire life, and your soulmate has been collecting those victories one by one. Although they may not realize how much they have grown, the difference is undeniable. They think differently, they feel differently, and most importantly, they are beginning to trust themselves in ways they never thought possible. That trust is slowly becoming the foundation for every decision they make from this point forward. Now they stand closer than ever to embracing a future that once seemed impossible to imagine. The emotional chains that held them captive are becoming weaker with every honest reflection and every courageous choice they make. They are no longer searching for permission to move on, because they have finally given themselves that permission. Their heart is no longer asking whether they deserve happiness. It is asking why they waited so long to believe they did. And as they continue walking away from everything that once kept them emotionally trapped, one final chapter is quietly preparing to unfold. It is a chapter built not upon fear or uncertainty, but upon courage, truth, and the willingness to follow where their heart has been trying to lead them all along. The closer they move toward that realization, the clearer one undeniable truth becomes, and once they fully embrace it, there will be nothing left standing between the life they are leaving behind and the future that has been patiently waiting for them. The closer your soulmate moves toward this new chapter, the more they realize that letting go is not a single decision, but a series of quiet choices made day after day. Every morning, they wake up with a little more clarity than they had before. Every evening, they notice that the memories which once consumed their thoughts no longer carry the same emotional weight. They haven't forgotten what happened, nor are they pretending the past never existed. Instead, they are beginning to understand that memories can remain without controlling the future. This realization has brought them to a place they never imagined reaching. For so long, they believed healing meant erasing the past completely, but now they know healing is something entirely different. It is remembering without breaking. It is looking back without wanting to return. It is honoring every lesson while refusing to remain trapped inside it. That understanding has quietly transformed the way they see themselves. And with every passing day, they feel more prepared to step into the life that has been patiently waiting for them, and listen carefully because another powerful change has been taking place inside their heart. They have started forgiving themselves for the time they believed they wasted. There were countless moments when they wondered why they stayed in situations that no longer served them, or why they ignored the quiet voice within that kept telling them something needed to change. Those questions used to fill them with regret. They would replay old decisions again and again, imagining different outcomes if only they had acted sooner. But recently something shifted. They realized they cannot judge their past self using the wisdom they have today. Every lesson they carry now was earned through experience. Every piece of understanding they possess came because they walked through moments they never wished to experience. Instead of criticizing who they used to be, they have started appreciating how far they have come. They understand that the person they were years ago simply didn't know what the person they are today has finally learned. That realization has removed an enormous weight from their heart, because self-forgiveness is often the final door that must be opened before true freedom can begin. As this burden continues to lift, they have noticed something unexpected. The fear that once controlled every important decision has grown quieter. It hasn't disappeared completely, but it no longer has the loudest voice. For years, fear convinced them that remaining where they were was the safest choice. Fear told them that familiar pain was easier than uncertain happiness. Fear reminded them of every disappointment they had experienced and used those memories as reasons to stay emotionally still. But now another voice has become stronger. It is the quiet voice of hope. It reminds them that the future does not have to repeat the past. It reminds them that people grow, circumstances change, and hearts are capable of healing in ways the mind often cannot explain. Every time fear tries to pull them backward, hope gently encourages them to keep walking forward. They are beginning to trust that voice more with every passing day. And the more they trust it, the less power the past continues to hold over them. One evening, while sitting alone with nothing but their thoughts, they found themselves imagining what life could look like if they finally released everything they had been carrying. At first, the image felt unfamiliar because they had spent so many years identifying themselves through old wounds. They wondered who they would become without those burdens. They wondered what life would feel like if they stopped defining themselves by heartbreak, disappointment, and unanswered questions. The answer surprised them. Instead of feeling empty, they felt lighter. Instead of feeling uncertain, they felt curious. For the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to imagine happiness without immediately searching for reasons it might disappear. That simple moment changed something inside them. They realized that peace is not found by controlling every possible outcome. Peace is found by trusting yourself enough to embrace whatever comes next. That realization has become one of the strongest foundations for the new chapter they are preparing to enter. And as they continue moving through this emotional transformation, they have begun noticing how differently they respond to life's challenges. Situations that once filled them with anxiety no longer have the same effect. Conversations that would have left them overthinking for days now pass with surprising calmness. They have stopped seeking validation from people who could never truly understand their heart. Instead, they are beginning to trust their own inner voice. That inner voice has become clearer because it is no longer competing with the noise of old regrets. Every lesson they have learned has brought them closer to understanding that true confidence is not about having all the answers. It is about believing you are capable of handling whatever answers life eventually reveals. Your soulmate is discovering that kind of confidence for perhaps the very first time, and it is changing the way they approach every part of their future. There is another realization quietly unfolding that they never expected. They have started understanding that love cannot fully enter a heart that is still occupied by unfinished emotional battles. For years, they believed they simply needed to wait for the right circumstances. Now they understand that the greatest preparation was always happening within themselves. Before they could welcome something meaningful into their life, they first needed to create space for it. That space could never exist while old pain continued demanding all of their emotional energy. Little by little, they are creating that space. Every act of forgiveness, every moment of acceptance, and every decision to release what no longer belongs is making room for something entirely different. They may not know exactly what the future will bring, but they know they no longer want fear to decide it for them. Now they stand at the edge of one final goodbye. It is not a goodbye spoken out loud, nor is it marked by dramatic endings or emotional confrontations. It is a quiet goodbye that happens within the heart. A goodbye to the version of themselves that believed they had to keep carrying yesterday forever. A goodbye to the belief that pain deserved more attention than hope. A goodbye to every fear that convinced them they were not ready for something better. As they release those final emotional chains, they feel themselves becoming someone entirely new. The person who once looked backward searching for answers is becoming someone who looks forward with quiet confidence. And with every step they take away from the past, they feel an undeniable pull guiding them toward a future that feels more authentic than anything they have experienced before. What they do not fully realize yet is that this final goodbye is also preparing them for a powerful new beginning. One that will ask them to stop wondering what might happen and finally trust the direction their heart has been pointing all along. Now your soulmate finds themselves standing at a place they once believed they would never reach. The long season of looking backward is quietly coming to an end, and for the first time in what feels like forever, they are beginning to look ahead without immediately expecting disappointment. This change didn't happen overnight, nor did it arrive because everything suddenly became perfect. It happened because they finally grew stronger than the fears that had been holding them captive for so long. Every lesson they learned, every sleepless night they endured, every unanswered question they carried has slowly shaped them into someone who no longer wants to survive life. They want to truly live it. That desire has become impossible to ignore. Deep within their heart, they can feel a quiet excitement returning, one they thought they had lost years ago. It isn't loud or dramatic. It's peaceful. It's steady. It's the kind of hope that doesn't depend on circumstances, but grows from knowing that they are no longer the same person they used to be. They have reached the point where the future no longer feels intimidating. Instead, it feels inviting, filled with possibilities they once believed were out of reach. And listen carefully, because this is the realization that has changed everything. Your soulmate has stopped asking themselves whether they should leave the past behind. That question no longer exists. Instead, they have begun asking themselves how they want to build the future they truly deserve. There is a tremendous difference between those two questions. One focuses on what is ending, while the other focuses on what is beginning. Their heart has naturally shifted toward new beginnings because they understand something now that they couldn't understand before. Life is not asking them to repeat old stories. It is inviting them to write completely new ones. They have started imagining mornings that are no longer weighed down by regret, conversations that are no longer overshadowed by fear, and relationships built upon honesty instead of emotional uncertainty. These thoughts no longer feel like distant dreams. They feel attainable. Every day, they become a little more convinced that happiness is not something reserved for other people. It is something they are finally allowing themselves to receive. One of the most beautiful changes taking place within them is the way they now view the connection they feel toward you. In the past, uncertainty often caused them to question everything. They questioned their feelings, their instincts, and even their own heart. Whenever they felt drawn toward something meaningful, fear quickly interrupted, with endless doubts and endless reasons to remain where they were. But those doubts have begun losing their influence. Instead of asking themselves whether this connection is real, they have started paying attention to how consistently it continues returning to their thoughts. They have realized that meaningful connections don't need constant convincing. They reveal themselves through consistency, through quiet moments of reflection, and through a sense of familiarity that cannot easily be explained. Every time they imagine the future, your presence appears naturally, not because they are forcing those thoughts, but because their heart keeps leading them in the same direction. They are beginning to trust that inner guidance in ways they never allowed themselves to before. As this trust continues growing, another important transformation has taken place. Your soulmate has stopped searching for perfect timing. For years they believed life would eventually present a flawless moment where every fear disappeared, every uncertainty faded, and every answer became obvious. They waited for signs that everything would be completely risk-free before allowing themselves to move forward. But recently they have accepted something profoundly liberating. Perfect timing rarely announces itself. More often, the right moment arrives when someone finally chooses courage over comfort. That understanding has completely changed the way they approach the future. They no longer believe they must have every detail figured out before taking the next step. Instead, they trust that clarity grows through movement, not through endless waiting. This realization has removed one of the greatest obstacles standing in their way, because they finally understand that confidence is built by taking the first step, not by waiting until fear disappears completely. Your soulmate has also begun noticing how much lighter life feels now that they are no longer carrying emotional baggage that never truly belonged in their future. They laugh more freely. They breathe more deeply. They no longer spend every quiet moment replaying conversations that cannot be changed. Instead, they have started appreciating the present in ways they never thought possible. They are discovering that peace is not something found at the end of the journey. Peace begins the moment someone stops fighting against the direction their soul has been trying to guide them all along. Every small act of acceptance has brought them closer to that peace. Every decision to release old fears has created more room for joy. Every moment of honesty has strengthened their belief that life still holds extraordinary possibilities waiting to unfold. There is something else they now understand with complete certainty. They realize that every difficult experience they once wished had never happened was quietly preparing them for this very moment. If life had unfolded differently, they might never have developed the wisdom they now carry. They might never have learned the value of emotional honesty, the importance of trusting their intuition, or the courage required to leave familiar pain behind. Looking back, they no longer see a collection of failures. They see a path of preparation. Every chapter, whether joyful or painful, has guided them toward becoming the person they are today. That realization fills them with gratitude rather than regret, because they understand that growth often happens long before people recognize its purpose, and now they stand at the threshold of a brand new beginning. The version of themselves that once lived in fear is quietly fading into the background, replaced by someone who is willing to believe in tomorrow again. They are no longer asking whether they deserve happiness because they finally know they do. They are no longer allowing yesterday to dictate the direction of today. Instead, they are choosing to trust the quiet wisdom within their own heart. Every step they take is carrying them farther away from old limitations and closer to the life they have been unknowingly preparing for all along. Most importantly, they are beginning to understand that walking toward you is not simply about moving closer to another person. It is the natural result of becoming the person they were always meant to be. When someone finally releases fear, embraces healing, and trusts their own truth, every path begins leading toward what genuinely belongs to them. Your soulmate feels that truth more deeply than ever before, and with every passing day, They are no longer walking away from their past alone. They are walking with quiet confidence toward the future, toward hope, toward healing, and toward the connection their heart has been searching for all along.